So without giving away too many spoilers, let me share the agenda for today. So we have 4 amazing panels lined up for today. The first one is a panel on agribusiness in the world today that starts right after this. We'll be hearing from top policymakers, researchers, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and financiers. Next up at 1:20, we'll be starting a panel on founding the agricultural skies, where we'll be hearing about drone-enhanced agriculture. Then we'll have a short break from 2 to 2:15, where you can go rest up whatever you want to do. Clear out your Zoom fatigue. At 2:15, we have our amazing keynote speaker, Stacy Kimmel from AeroFarm. So make sure you're there at 2:15. And last, but certainly not the least, at 3, we'll have a panel from the field to the table that brings together key entrepreneurs from different parts of agricultural supply chain. So looking forward to all that. Cole, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ananya. And one last thing too, kind of going over the technical aspects of this. So this is a Zoom webinar, so it might be familiar to some, it might not be familiar to others. But a couple key things to know kind of throughout the day, and it will help make this experience more interactive for everyone and help also make it be a smooth process as we transfer from one panel to another. So for the audience members, you should have 2 options at the bottom, either Q&A or to raise your hand. We're going to have Q&A sessions at the end of pretty much every panel and speaker event. So feel free to either type your comments in the Q&A box and the panelists can choose to either type it in or they can address it live, or feel free to raise your hand. And I'm going to be helping moderate some of the Q&A sessions as well as some of the other board members throughout each panel. So if you raise your hand, I might say, hey, there's a question from blank audience member, and then I can ask you to unmute yourself. You'll be able to unmute, everyone will be able to hear your question live, and then the panelists will be able to respond in real time. Now, if you're a panelist or a speaker, I apologize in advance. You might see me stopping your video or asking to move you to attendee or moving you from an attendee to a panelist. And that just helps organize things on our end and make sure that everyone is timed correctly with each panel and everything. If you have any questions about the technical aspects, feel free to drop it in the Q&A and one of our board members will help answer that for you. If there are any further questions, feel free to let us know. Someone put a great question in there. If you want to find more information about some of the things we've been referencing, feel free to always go to our website. It's www.agribusiness-club.com. And also, without further ado, we will go ahead and kick off the first panel, which is agribusiness in the world today. So we'll go ahead and ask the members of that panel if you can go ahead and turn on your videos. And then I will introduce our moderator for the session.
I am getting an error message that, oh, there we go.
Awesome. Apologize for that. So this is an awesome panel, and it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, one of my personal professors, taught one of my favorite courses, Professor Witold Henisz. Professor Witold Henisz is the Deloitte and Touche Professor of Management and in honor of Russell E. Palmer, former Managing Director at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. He received his PhD in Business and Public Policy from the Haas School of Business and University of California, Berkeley, and previously received an MA in International Relations from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. His research examines the impact of political hazards on the international investment strategy, including efforts by multinational corporations to engage in corporate diplomacy and win the hearts and minds of external stakeholders. And I can also personally say he teaches one of the most fantastic courses in management at Wharton, Management 209, International Management in the International Political Environment. And I'm really excited to hear this panel. So I will turn it over to you, Professor Henisz, and thank you again for helping moderate.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks. It's great to see you again. And yeah, it's a class with certain relevance to this class. Farah is also a member of the class this year. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to moderate this panel and to take part in the conference. I mean, if we think back to the founding of the Wharton School, Joseph Wharton had the idea to create a management program of education to prove that managers could solve the social problems incident to our civilization, that they weren't just bookkeepers. They stood for something more, and they should be treated as a profession. I can't think of a social problem incident to our civilization more important than nutrition, biodiversity, the water scarcity, deforestation issues, all these things that agribusiness touches on. And we think about the strengths of Wharton today, 130 years later, around data, analytics, technology management. I mean, these all come together in the area of agribusiness. So it's great to be able to help raise the profile as the Agribusiness Club is doing around this important industry and to hopefully draw more interest among Wharton stakeholders to it. We've got a great kickoff panel spanning a range of stakeholder sectors, if you will, both academic, government sector in Dr. Athanasios Tsaftaris, who is the Dean of the Parada College from the American Farm School. We've also got the financial sector represented well, both from the VC private equity side, Aaron Rudberg, the Managing Director and COO of S2G Ventures, and then the large scale agricultural finance with Dr. Roland Fumasi, who's the North American Regional Head of Rabobank Research on Food and Agribusiness. And then the important entrepreneurial sector where the new technologies are hopefully going to come from Ron Hovsepian, the CEO of Indigo Ag. So we've got a diverse set of really experienced, qualified speakers to kick off the event. And I want to have a kind of broad-ranging discussion around where the sector has been, where it's headed, and given my own interest, some of the stakeholder concerns around environment, social, governance factors. So let's start with the broad technology and where is the industry headed. I'd like to ask all the panelists, what do you see as some of the most important forces influencing the sector in the short to medium term? What is the future of agritech? Is it biotechnology, drone technology? Is COVID going to change the sector? Feel free to zero in on anything that you think is important, but give us a sense of what you're watching and what you think is driving change in the sector right now. Let's see, is Dr. Tsaftaris with us? I don't see him unmuted. But if not, we'll start. If we could start with Dr. Fumasi, if you could kick off the conversation.
Sure. Am I coming through okay?
You are.
Perfect. All right. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I have to say, when I realized that Wharton School had this agribusiness club, I mean, it really made my month, right? And it's just one more piece of optimism out there. We're going to talk about how complex the issues are today, but certainly that added just another log to the fire of my optimism that we will get through the challenges that we face. So very much appreciate being here. Now, when I think about to your question about where I think the hottest area of ag tech is, and you named a few general examples, I would simply say all of the above. Right? That's the real answer. When you think about the complexities around the limited resources that we have globally, the need to feed a lot more people out there. And I will say, as kind of an underpinning of all this, it's not just about population growth globally. That gets a lot of the headlines, right? We know we're going to have 2-3 billion more people to feed. It's also about rising incomes globally. And that's a very positive side of the social equity story. But we have to remember, as incomes rise, particularly in developing countries, the types of food that people want to eat and can afford to eat start to change, right? So that adds an entirely different area of complexity. So everything from how consumers make decisions and purchase food, that's all being more technologically driven, right? And COVID certainly added another piece to further the enhancement of things like online food purchases, online grocery, etc. So channels to market have shifted rapidly, but then you think all the way, back upstream about global agricultural producers really needing to do more with less resources. And in order to accomplish that, it's going to take significant public-private partnership. It's going to continue to fuel agri-tech innovation along many, many lines, right? From drones to biotech to just things that improve management practices globally. So that's kind of a backdrop of how I see the scenario out there.
Very high level forces from demographics, technology, and then the ongoing and pressing resource constraints that we all face, driving need for collaboration and partnership and innovation. Aaron, where would you zero in our interest from where you sit in the financial sphere?
Yeah, thank you again for having me. I think Roland did a really good job of laying a backdrop there. COVID has really accelerated a number of these pieces, specifically around the digitization of the supply chain. I think there's been significant investment over the last 12 to 24 months in a number of areas in the food and ag sector, and I think it gives us just added confidence that this is the right time and the right place to be betting on your career. Frankly, I think that maybe 10, 15 years ago this wasn't the place to be when you're coming out of undergrad or MBA, but more and more entrepreneurs, innovators, I find, are leaving sort of Silicon Valley tech companies and thinking about how do they do something in food and agriculture, because just the tangible nature of that business and what we're doing to really improve planet and human health. A couple of areas that we're particularly interested in, that just not to build a little bit on what Roland said, that I think is to highlight. One, over the last 12 months, we've seen significant increase in alternative proteins. That was, really 24 months ago, you had things like Beyond Meat really pierce through kind of that capital markets, into the public sphere. That has just accelerated what's happening there. And I think in many ways, that's having an impact even further upstream when you think about things like yellow pea and some of the lentils that are being used in these ingredients, which is good for soil health. And so I think you're going to continue to see more innovation. We've talked a lot about how we are still in that iPod phase of alternative proteins. We moved from what was veggie burgers 20 years ago to Beyond Meat, and we're going to, in 20 years, I think I'm very excited about where that's headed, just because the innovation there is quite significant, particularly around clean label. The other place that maybe just to touch on is around food as medicine. And I think COVID, food is kind of health, food is nutrition. COVID has seen, if you look at all the retail data from SPINS and IRI, has just seen a significant increase in purchasing of supplements in particular. I think, again, supplements are, from our perspective, can typically go through fad cycles, but there's a fundamental sort of interest by consumers in what they're eating. And I think COVID and the pandemic has really expressed that. And that what we're seeing is really that pull through from the consumer around clean, healthy food. And ultimately that hopefully drives down the costs and ultimately democratizes healthy food for all Americans or all individuals. And so those are a couple of areas, and we're seeing actually this matching of food with therapeutics in cancer diagnostics. There's a number of things in stage 1, stage 2, or phase 1, phase 2 trials where they're pairing food with therapeutics, which actually is quite exciting, and seeing meaningful impacts on cancers and other things. And to me, again, that's sort of the future of where food and healthcare are really going to merge. And what we put in our bodies matters. And I think in terms of attacking some of these chronic diseases, that's something that you're going to see continued investment in, and all parts of the ag chain really play a role there. I won't necessarily go into what's happening on biologics and carbon, because I think Ron's going to do a really good job of talking a little bit about some of that work. But there's a lot of exciting activity happening there as well, particularly with the new administration and some of their investments that they're making.
Thanks, Aaron. So Ron, we've heard from two very optimistic spins from the financial sector. Is it as optimistic on the entrepreneurial side? Do you agree, or is there differences of perspective when you sit as the CEO?
Yeah, it better be. That's what we're here to do, right? We're here to make those innovations and make this thing happen. So the guys with the money are right, and we've got to back them up on that one. First, thank you all for having me. I really do appreciate this wonderful opportunity to speak to all of you and be with these esteemed colleagues here. I think both of you touched on really great topics of what's happening here. And as I was reflecting on what I could add to what they said, which is limited because of what they've accomplished and what they've highlighted, I would ask all of you to step back and really think, what's the mission of what we're trying to get done here? And it's really around, how do we harness nature, really where Aaron just was and where Roland was, to sustainably feed this planet, right? And then you got to take the word sustainable and break that down. And if you have a little fun with it, I really agree with what Roland said about, and Aaron said about digitalization, the role that plays. I see that as a big category. But when I was thinking, and when I first came into agricultural industry, I kind of said, well, what were the last two big inventions? Okay, so a little pop quiz, you're in school. 1923, the tractor, and then the Green Revolution about 60 years ago, okay? And everybody literally kind of, that was what I could get. And then, yeah, we've had some new things happening. So it is ripe for change, which I would highlight what Aaron's and Roland's saying is like, we're ready for this change. So now let's break it down a little further. I see digitalization happening at the field, drones, hyperspectral capabilities occurring out there to capture the information. Digitalization is going to carry all the way through the supply chains, and it's going to go right to the consumer. So when you think of that supply chain, think of it in the context of right now we produce a crop and we push it through a supply chain. We're doing contracts now where AB InBev wants us, they're paying the farmer 6% more to actually use 10% less water, nitrogen, and produce less greenhouse gas emissions. That wasn't happening before, right? So everything Roland and Aaron touched on, and I see those things are happening. So digitization is going to happen at many levels. The data in the field, it's going to then also go into the biochemistry of what's in the soil, the biogeochemical level. And it's also happening exactly, I'm right with Aaron, and we should probably chat Aaron after, because there's a project that we're working on back at Flagship Pioneering that is working right in that zip code you're talking about, the intersection of what we could do with health and with the foods that we're putting in our bodies. So there's a really cool set of innovations that are to come from there. I think biologics is going to be a very fascinating near-term set of sciences that are going to really excite the world because it's nature's own tooling. We're not doing anything different. We're actually just coating seeds, and we're actually able to get more yield, take down nitrogen usage, take down other pieces there. So I look to that as a key part of the innovation. And then I think the one that's going to be more exciting for all of you wonderful business majors here is a set of business models that also need to change. And as I came into the industry and was learning about it, what I'm seeing is a set of behavioral and structural incentive alignment issues that I think are just starting to go through a revolution as well. So I'm going to go with Roland's answer, D, all the above. And it really is that approach that we should take to it, because it's going to be crop production, regenerative sets of practices. On the carbon side, we can talk more about that. Vit, as you said, we can get into that as we want to dig into that. What we're seeing on carbon for excitement, just to get everyone enthusiastic, Earth's farmland is 1/3 of the Earth's land mass. It is a carbon sink for us to store it. If we can take on those regenerative practices, which are at the underpinning of sustainability, we can put cover crops down, get longer root systems, and we can draw carbon down. My guess is we can take about 0.5 teraton of carbon dioxide out of the air. That's our best math. So call it 1/3 to 0.5 teraton, which could really impact the planet to the tune of 1 to 2 degrees, which would be fantastic. But it also makes the soil richer for the farmer, and it does it in a natural manner. These are the things that we're all blessed to see, Roland and Aaron and myself. So back over to you, but very excited to be here and look forward to chatting more with you about these things.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks. I think Dr. Tsaftaris is still having challenges connecting. So let me play a bit the devil's advocate or the professorial role. This all sounds so great, right? That these revolutions are going to come. We've got drive from the customer side, from the supplier side. We have new technology. But then when I look at the way this is received by stakeholders, by customers, are customers willing to pay the additional cost, or do they place a premium on low cost? And what about the longstanding practices of agribusiness to get them hooked on certain products, certain formulations, which may not be in their health interest? What about the concerns of stakeholders? So much of this innovation and the new investments have to come in frontier markets where the population growth is occurring. there's huge concern around foreign investment and agribusiness investment in frontier markets, especially in Africa. The Oakland Institute is raising all these concerns around big business coming in and not placing the community interests at heart. You know, the water implications of some of these alternative crops, the deforestation that's occurring in Brazil, both to support some of the animals that are being used for those high income consumers, but also for soy. So there's a host of stakeholder concerns. What are you doing to address the stakeholder concerns that stand in the way of realizing this rosy scenario? And maybe Dr. Fumasi, if we start with you again, and then we'll go through the panel. And looks like Dr. Tsaftaris has been able to join us. So maybe, well, let's start with that question, and then we'll give Dr. Tsaftaris some extra time to talk about the trends and the stakeholder response as we go through the panel. Dr. Fumasi?
Sure. No, definitely I can touch on this. And Ron kind of set this up for me a bit here. And it's about the recognition that true sustainability has those three important legs, right, that we sometimes talk about. It has an environmental sustainability leg, it has a social sustainability leg, and it has an economic sustainability leg. Only where those three things intersect will we end up with truly sustainable solutions. So I think that the general answer to your question is we need more champions out there. And it sounds like we may have hundreds or thousands of them on the call today. That's awesome. But we need more champions for that balanced approach and the recognition that there's always a cost and benefit side to the equation, right? It's always more complex than what we generally tend to recognize. I'll give you a specific real world example, right? When we think about organic production systems versus non-organic production systems, if we look at the environmental footprint of 1 acre of organic production relative to 1 acre of non-organic production, right? There's science out there that would suggest that 1 acre of organic production may have a lighter footprint, right? And I'm not here today to argue the merits of whether that's true or not, okay? So that's on a per acre or per hectare basis. But we also know that in an organic production system, there is greater yield risk in that system over the long run, to the tune, depending on whose numbers you look at, of maybe about 30%. And I'm thinking open field production here. So if I have a 30% increase in my yield risk, that means I have to put 40% more land into production to produce the same amount of food. So if that's the case, have I really designed a more environmentally sustainable system, right? And again, I'm not trying to argue one type of agriculture over another. I think that's where agriculture gets itself into trouble often, is too often setting up that argument between animal-based protein, plant-based versus plant-based, organic versus non-organic, etc. But again, my point is that you have to think 2, 3, 4 moves ahead like a chess player and realize that what seemingly may be a solution to solve a problem may actually spin off other challenges. And so that's the long-winded answer. That my primary point is we need champions out there for balance of those three legs of the sustainability equation.
Roland, do you think on the financial side that you're able to evaluate those trade-offs sufficiently? Do you see, do you incorporate that into your decisions on which projects to invest in, how to assess the portfolio of investments?
That's a great question. There's a yes and a no. So at Rabobank, because our global footprint and our global reach is so vast, right? We operate in about 40 different countries, largest food and ag bank in the world, but we see many, many different things that allow us to begin to actually quantify some of that value out there. But it's very elusive, right? Particularly around carbon sequestration. There needs to be more standardization around that. So one of the things that we just launched is the Rabobank, for example, and we're piloting right now with some of our U.S. producers a system where we're trying to hone in on better ways to truly measure the value of that carbon out there, right? And the value that a particular operation brings in potential carbon sequestration, for example, right? Because you can go to your neighbor's operation, and because the soil types are vastly different, heck, it could be on the same operation. When you start to change variables like soil, for example, you come up with a completely different scientific answer when it comes to something like soil sequestration, or I'm sorry, carbon sequestration, right? And I'm only talking about soil differences. So you can imagine the measurement challenge that we have ongoing out there. So yeah, we're trying, and it's going to take continued experimentation and development, but it's challenging.
Yeah, just to build on that a little bit on that challenge for a second, there's a lot going on in that space, and we can have a discussion on that. I am intimate with those numbers, intimate with what's happening in there. And for the farmer, you're looking at a variety of production capability from a carbon as a grain, if you treat it like a crop. And we've gone through that methodology and had it cleared with Vera. And that's been approved now, and it is brutally detailed. We have to go out and do soil samples. We have to capture it, and we have that all in the models. So we'll be issuing at Indigo, we'll be issuing the first truly verified and registered credits this fall. You will see those from us, and they are highly regarded, highly sought after, because they hit that premium nature Roland's talking about. Because we did all the dirty work that he's talking about, and the soil and the biogeochemical modeling and the crop modeling and all that work has been done, and the farmers are turning in that data right now. So it's going to be I think it's going to be a near-term solution for us. Won't be perfect, but it's a really fascinating area that, I've talked to Barry on your board there. So we at Rabo, so we've had a lot of good motion there. So it's a really fascinating area. Sorry, I just want to make sure that people knew this is coming.
No, that's great. Let's try to, Dr. Tsaftaris, if we could bring you into the conversation. Sorry you had the technical difficulties, but we opened the panel with just a discussion about the biggest trends, the biggest things to keep in mind in the agribusiness sector. And we heard some really positive outlook on demographics, consumer-driven change, also new technology and supplier-driven innovation. And now we were shifting into more of the stakeholder environment. Please give us your perspective on the biggest trends of the industry, but also as an academic and former government minister, some of the obstacles or some of the things that are holding us back from realizing the potential that you see.
Hello, good evening from Greece, from Thessaloniki, and from the American Farm School. It's really an honor to be with you this evening, and I'm glad to participate in such an interesting discussion and contribute to from my perspective, as you say, as a geneticist and breeder, emphasize a little bit more on genomics research and plant breeding, seed technologies. And we focus, usually when we speak about sustainability in agriculture, we focus mostly on the cultivation steps and the processes later on. But we should not ignore the first step in agricultural production that is related to seed breeding, seed technology, breeding new varieties. This is in a field that is revolutionized these days because progress that is made in genomics now. We have read the genomes of thousands of different species, both cultivated cultivars, varieties, old varieties, wild varieties, etc., etc. And that gave us the opportunity to make plant breeding a more scientific-based, let's say, technology. In other words, we can identify easily now a disease-resistant, a drought-tolerant gene, or a drought-tolerant pathway of genes, I should say, a cold-tolerant, and all of this can contribute now to breed the appropriate cultivars for the appropriate environment. Instead of, for I say, if you have a seed that is a cultivar that is resistant to a disease, then the farmer should not have to run, let's say, 2 or 3 times with his tractor and spray in the field in order to protect his crop from these devastating diseases, etc. So this is the best way to prevent things instead of try to solve them during the cultivation step. If you leave the problem to be solved during the cultivation step by the farmer, that will cost more to the environment. It will make the farming a lot more expensive. We will leave for the consumers different chemicals that will be left behind as residues for the consumers, etc., etc. So this is the emphasis right now, thanks to the progress in the field of genetics and genomics, and as I said, is revolutionizing the plant breeding approach. Now, having said that, as far as the breeding is concerned, let me go a little bit to seed and seed technology. In addition to what I have said, the more problems that we solving at this stage, for instance, we do a lot of seed coating these days. We make a coffet of a seed just to supply the seed the tiny chemical that needs to be protected at the point where it's germinating, or at the spot of the soil where a fungus that could be there, or bacteria that could be affecting the young germinating plant. Then instead of leaving the farmer to spray the whole field with chemicals in order to protect that specific spot. So we speak about preventing a problem prior to have seen in the field and try to fight it with different chemicals, fertilizers, hormones, etc., etc. So
Dr. Tsaftaris,
another technology that is helping these days.
Isn't that a great example, though, of the promise of technology and then the gaps in realization? I mean, the backlash against genetically modified organisms, especially in the European Union, but globally, it's not, we don't see it typically, or many consumers don't see it in terms of the benefits to yield and the benefits in terms of the factors that you've been describing in terms of harvesting and cultivation. They focus on glyphosate, and they focus on the risks and the unknown unknowns, to the point where many of these practices aren't even feasible in some countries due to legal and regulatory constraints. So how do we balance, and how do we better educate policymakers about the trade-offs around genetic manipulation and the promise that it offers? How would you, as a former minister, say we could have done a better job in the agribusiness sector at avoiding the fear of genetic modification and genetically modified organisms?
You're absolutely right. But I always say that technology is solving the problems of technology. For instance, for the couple of decades ago, we really had to deal with GMOs, genetically modified varieties. In fact, during those days, I was not the minister, but I was serving as a representative of Greece to the European Union, and we also participated in the discussion between EU members and the United States, etc. And in fact, we had difficulties to convince some, countries that are entirely against the genetically modified varieties. But that didn't took too much, except a couple of cultivars. Later on, many different crops were genetically modified in Europe. But today, we don't speak about GMO. We see now genome editing, and we see a lot of genomics and conventional breeding, breeding very quickly without the need of engineering. Now with genome editing, you can not only identify and verify a specific mutation that can, generate a phenotype that is favorable for the farmer. So the technology is substituting the GMO. I don't see any now discussion taking place for editing technologies or genomic applications, etc., etc. Now, allow me to say one extra thing that is also related to another technology that is, flourishing these days. Instead of seeding seeds or coded seeds as described, in a number of crops now, particularly vegetables like tomato, peppers, eggplants, etc., I see now efforts to apply this technology to cotton, for instance. And that is related to grafted plants. This technology now using a wild root system. And on the top of that, you graft the favorable variety that gives you the good tomato or the good yield without the need to protect the plant with mostly, let's say, soil diseases, soil bacteria, etc., weed control, drought. Now, this is another technology that could help now the farmer to face some of the problems in the field without the need of too much chemicals, too much water, too much fertilizers, too much plastic, etc. This is technology already automated. You see a lot of robotics going on. The cost is going down. We see a lot of robotics, planting these grafted vegetables. This is also another technology that can help the farmer to cut down the cost of cultivation systems.
Thank you, Dr. Tsaftaris. Aaron, coming back, I mean, we've had already a wide-ranging discussion of potential concerns, but how do you see the stakeholder trade-off? What are some of the major issues in which you're trying to assuage concerns around, whether it be environmental, policy, legal, things that could hold us back from realizing the potential of the innovation we've been speaking about?
I think we've, in many ways, I mean, it's a great question. In many ways, we have designed a food system that works. In a way, for 50, 60 years, as Roland or Ron mentioned earlier, we developed a very efficient food system, particularly in the US, but I think globally as well, a food system that is interconnected. It's created a low cost, generally, food to all corners of the planet, for the most part. Again, there are some exceptions. And, we say we want to move from kind of a cheap calories to cheap nutrition or affordable nutrition. And that's really the journey we're now on. We've been successful at this first part. Now let's figure out how we get to this next piece. And I think a key part of that is working with industry. As you noted, there are lots of reasons why investors, frankly, over the last 20 years, haven't invested in food and agriculture, despite it being the largest industry in the world. They invest in software or life sciences, because food and agriculture was not a place where you could make money as an investor historically, because it's commodity, low margin, high volume. I mean, all physical commodity. I mean, there's all these reasons why people don't invest. But I think we're proving that change is coming and that there are opportunities for investment here and there are breakthrough potential on the exit side. The challenge, again, we have, and you noted this, is that we have oligopolies that control each portion of the system. So, we can go through, the input side to really the farmer obviously is very fragmented, but you've got the input side, then you've got the processors, the brands, even on the fast casual side, there's a number of big companies that control and can move markets. And so the key is, in our view, is to work with them, but disrupt them as well. We talk about, you have tanker ships that are, you cannot move these tanker ships. And that's what these companies are. You're not going to be able to convince them to adopt innovation very quickly. And we need a bunch of speedboats that are just moving around them and disrupting them and moving them slowly. And if they're not careful, they will be disrupted. And their innovation is going to be displaced. And what we're seeing is a lot of very innovative people coming out of those companies. So they're losing talent right now. I mean, that is happening. That to me is, if I'm a CEO, that's a huge threat, because culturally, I was on a call this morning where a company was talking, C-level executive was saying, we're 200 years old. We've been doing this for 200 years. And I'm thinking, gosh, you're millennials and Gen Zs. I'm not sure that's the message you should be sending. He's like, we have a 200-year culture. I mean, okay, I'm easily going to take people from your team that are talented. So I think that to me is sort of where that innovation, that opportunity is working with the current system, but we've got to disrupt the hell out of them to get them to move. Because if they don't, consumers, by the way, are demanding this. And what we talked about earlier, this technology is providing transparency like it never has before. And we are just beginning that. I mean, I think that's what's so exciting, is that is very early. We're not sure what the solutions are. I mean, I don't think any of us know, but we know that the work's being done and it's getting smarter. And we're actually, we're going to accomplish, I think, some really interesting things. And Some of these companies will survive another 200 years. Some are going to die, I predict.
So let me pick up on that. Hopefully we'll have, I want to leave some time for some questions. I was asked to leave about 10 minutes for questions. So maybe we can do a quick lightning round, just building on Aaron's point, which I think is really an important one. What's the role of the big established private companies in this space? Are they going to be part of the revolution? Or are they going to be, do we have to defeat them? Do we have to fight back? You know, is this a revolution that happens around them and subsumes them? You know, the ADMs, the Cargills, the Bungies, what's their role in this process that we're talking about? They're not on the panel, but they certainly play an important role in the sector. Given the sensitivity of the question, I'll take volunteers for answers. Who would like to talk about the role of the major private companies and whether they can be a force for change? And then please do post your questions so Cole or Farah can help direct them once we get to the Q&A.
Yeah, I think they're a very important part of the solution. I think that because I love the speedboat analogy, right? Pushing the big ships around. We're there. That's happening every day. And so I think the larger food and agribusiness firms out there have come to that realization, and they will continue to be more and more aggressive and willing to change because they know they have to, and they're an important piece of the puzzle. We don't get there without their cooperation and their willingness to make those changes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. I think the companies should stay in, particularly the big companies, because they have the capital to invest in new things that are coming. And I think that a new thing that's coming out is that they will start breeding genetic material, let's say, new and improved varieties that are not, say, the important thing is only the high yield, but they should have characteristics that are more appropriate to human nutrition or to nutrition needs of specific groups of people. When I was a minister, for instance, I put a lot of emphasis on a sentence say that we should not speak about, let's say, we are cultivate this for producing food for humans. No, all humans are not the same. So, for instance, we put a lot of effort to start cultivating these low gluten wheats that are very good food for those who are suffering from the celiac disease. They have reacted to gluten. Now we see more and more cultivars coming out for people who have kidney problems, diabetics, etc., etc. Now this is now an extra value for the farmers' product. And having said that, this is a good way to increase the income that will come to the farmer, and that will give also a good opportunity for the companies, the seed companies or the pharmaceuticals or the digital now technologies that enter in the field that can get a penny more because they offer 2 pennies values for the consumer now. And having said at the beginning, as you mentioned, that we with having this demographic problem and the extended of life expectancy and the percentage of elderly people, they require more and more specific food that can prevent problems instead of having them to solve through different chemicals or pharmaceuticals. This is now a really costly business. If we try to prevent these problems, that would be a lot more better. Sorry for taking.
Let me make sure we get Ron's perspective on this question, and then I see a couple questions that have come in the chat. So let's turn to the audience after that. But Ron, final word before we turn to the audience.
Yeah, real quickly, very complex industry, lots of components on the journey, all as appropriately defined by those oligopolies. So we have to work with that inertia, and we have to disrupt with technologies, but assimilate with them as partners to really bring about significant changes, the way I would look at it. It's not binary. Some, I do agree with Aaron, some will go away that don't embrace that change. The ones that have the balance sheet in play will be around. And I think it's really that simple as I look at it. So disruptive technologies, assimilating into the industry will be the core strategy for us to ultimately change the industry in totality.
All right, we have a couple questions that have, well, actually, Aaron, let me give you the last word. You raised this question of the speedboat and the tugboat. Are you as optimistic about collaboration, or are you still in the reverie?
I am actually, yeah, I mean, we collaborate quite a bit with industry. We have a whole team on our team that does that for us on our behalf. And so our view is the way to change is to get in the boardroom and advocate for change, push. That many of them are doing co-investing, and I would agree with what Roland said. They're increasing this because I think they're seeing it. They're being advised also by their McKinsey, BCG, and Bain consultants. So I think it is coming, and it's good.
Great.
Good. We're going to see more.
All right, so let me turn to the audience. Colin Farr, do you want the audience members to ask their own questions, or should I read them off? How do you want to manage that?
Yeah, I think if you want to read them off, that would be great. And then if anyone wants to ask the question live, just use the raise hand function, and we'll allow you to do that.
Okay, so I can't see the first name, but we have a question here about transferring technology and what could be done more to transfer some of the cutting edge technology that's being developed into the emerging market or developing country context. Any specific ideas there?
We're already doing some of that. I got a call from the Emerson Collective on the West Coast when the COVID pandemic hit, and we were very concerned about crops being planted in Africa specifically. We took our geospatial capabilities and satellites, we put them over there to help out so that we could see actually what plantings were going on, just so they could think about how to allocate their money. So there's a lot of really good technology that we can share, farm out to those countries to be helpful there. And I'm seeing a lot of uptick of the biologics. These are the things that we would apply to a seed from nature. We're seeing a good uptick there in India in particular, is where we're seeing a lot of activity as well. So I think these things will find their ways actually quickly to those geographies. We just have to make a concerted effort at it on our journey together. So that helps.
Yeah, any other panelists want to speak to that? Go ahead, Roland.
Well, over at Rabo, we have an innovation platform. Probably the most well-recognized part of that innovation platform is what we call our Food Bites program. That program is designed to search out and vet emerging technologies from around the globe, right? And I guess I want to remind everybody, sometimes the best emerging technologies don't come from the developed world and then get necessarily pushed into the less developed world. Sometimes it works the other way around. And so oftentimes we find some of the most innovative technologies out there in startup companies are actually coming from the lesser developed countries, right? And one of the goals of that program then is that we link up those technologies with some of our larger corporate clients, like the types of clients that we talked about on the last question, so that they can begin to work together to find suitable solutions to some of these challenges. So that's a specific example of where we're trying to move the needle at linking up innovation with some of these larger ships.
Nathan had a question in the chat just about the role of government and what would be the message that the panelists would like to send to our new secretary or new and former secretary of agriculture? What role can government play in this process of transformation and innovation that's occurring in the sector? What's missing in terms of government policy? Leave it open to volunteers on the panel.
My view would be that we should make sure that we leave that room for innovation, for entrepreneurship. You know, many of the, I think as we all know in government, you've got, particularly on the lobbying front, many of these companies have large lobbying teams that have constructed a system. Again, I go back to why are the reasons not to invest in food and ag? Regulation, highly regulated industry is one of them. And, you know, as a result, those rules have been written by a lot of these big players. And so whether it's, you know, financial solutions that dictate how the farmer operates, lending and insurance, you know, those don't necessarily give room to a farmer and I'm just picking one example, give room to a farmer to experiment and take risk. In many ways, it dictates exactly how they need to do planting and cultivating. And so I think giving that room and listening to innovation and entrepreneurs, small voices that are coming up with very innovative stuff now, I think is even different from when the secretary was the secretary, in the prior administration or 2 prior administrations ago. And so that would be my advice: is listen more, open your aperture, and listen to some of the other players that are in the field, as opposed to just the big companies and the big trade associations that represent, I think, those companies as well.
I'll second the innovation statement. That was going to be my exact commentary, is let innovation run. And then the second thing I'd suggest to the secretary would be, let's get the farmers to the table next to you, Mr. Secretary, as well, which I know you care about them. You really need to hear their voices. If they're running at $40 an acre of profit right now in the US as an example, let's talk about what we're going to do to help them get on that alignment of the incentive structure for that innovation to occur that Aaron referenced and I'm referencing. I really believe that little tweak there on the system could make a big, big difference, but get the farmer to the table as well with us.
And go ahead, please, Dr. Tsaftaris.
Can I add something? From our perspective in Europe and in Greece in particularly, we try to convince the government to invest in agriculture, mainly train young people. We have not only a decrease of the number of people dealing with agriculture, but also as far as age is concerned, we try to see more and more young, well-educated people entering the agricultural field. Otherwise, speaking about new technologies now, artificial intelligence, digital technologies, robotics, etc., more sophisticated machinery. Old farmers cannot compete, cannot do this job the way they should be. So the best way to help agriculture, as far as government is concerned, to try and help educate and help enter in agriculture numerous young people who are well familiarized with all these digital technologies now. I think this is a big challenge now in Europe and for Greece as well.
I see we're in the last minute, I think, of our panel, and so I don't think we'll have time to get to the last question, although I think it's related, Dr. Tsaftaris, I think your answer talks a little bit about this process of technology transfer to small farmers and the role that government can play. Actually, a former colleague of mine from the Wharton School, Jerry McDermott, has done extensive work on this in Argentina and looking at the important role that some of these government research centers can play in bringing the technology down to the smaller scale and bringing it down into operations. So maybe that's partly an answer. Sorry, we don't have time to hear from all the panelists. Thank you all for taking the time to this, joining us in this kickoff panel. I think it was great to hear such a broad set of stakeholders tackling some of these big issues. And I think my colleague, Natalie Carlson, is going to be moderating the next panel, and I'm sure you're in good hands with her. But thanks to all, and good luck for the rest of the day.
You too. Thank you.
And I just want to reiterate the thanks for all the panelists. That was an awesome panel. Really learned a lot about so many different aspects of agriculture, and really appreciate you all taking the time to be here today.